illusionariness. And the future, of course, is just a dream, a bare dream. And so that might lead us to conclude that our present moment existence is also a dream. So it's a dream in which we're the Buddha of this moment. So today I want to expand on or comment on a little bit a koan that we read Monday evening in our depth and practice reading, and because it's a very provocative and also very unusual. And it's called Baizhang and the Wild Fox. So I'm just going to read it to you because that's the easiest way. This is in the translation by Guo Gu in this book, Passing Through the Gateless Barrier. I like his translations. Baizhang and the Wild Fox. This is case 2. Every time Baizhang taught, there was an old man who followed the congregation to listen to Dharma talks. When the congregation dispersed, so would the old man. Unexpectedly, one day this elderly man stayed behind, so Baizhang approached him. "Who is it that stands before me?" The old man said, "I'm actually not human. In the time of the ancient Buddha Kashyapa, when I was dwelling here on this very mountain, a student asked me, 'Does a person of great practice still fall into cause and effect or not?' I replied that he does not fall into cause and effect. As a consequence, I have been condemned to be a fox for 500 rebirths. I now ask you, Master, for a turning phrase so as to release me from being a wild fox." Then he asked, "Does a person of great practice still fall into cause and effect or not?" Baizhang said, "He is not deluded about cause and effect." At these words, the old man was greatly awakened. He bowed in reverence and said, "I have now shed this fox's body behind the other side of the mountain. Please, Master, give me a funeral service due to a dead monk." Baizhang ordered the rector to pound the gavel to summon the assembly and announce to them, "After we eat, we shall hold a funeral for a dead monk." The congregation was puzzled and began to discuss the matter among themselves. They went to the infirmary, but there was no one sick there. They wondered why Baizhang was acting like this. After their meal, Baizhang led the congregation to a cliff on the other side of the mountain, where he used his cane and dragged out the body of a dead fox from a crevice in the rocks. They then formally cremated the body as they would a monk's. That night, Baizhang ascended up to the Dharma hall and related the full story of what had happened. Wang Bo then asked, "One wrong reply and this old man was condemned to be a fox for 500 rebirths. If his reply had been correct, then what?" Baizhang said, "Come here and I'll tell you." Wang Bo then went up and gave Baizhang a good slap in the face. Baizhang clapped his hands and laughed and said, "I knew the Western barbarian's beard was red, but didn't know that red was the beard of the barbarian." Puzzling, isn't it? So, the question is really, when enlightened, is a person still subject to cause and effect? Do they still create karma? And Baizhang's answer is he or she is not deluded about cause and effect. So what does it mean to not be deluded about cause and effect without falling into cause and effect? So this is a very important teaching in Buddhism. And so our understanding of cause and effect, our own understanding of cause and effect, drive absolutely everything. We use that model of cause and effect that we hold to explain, predict, and control. So at the personal level, In our meditation, we have this linear view of if I do this, then that will happen. If I meditate, I'll be calm, or I won't be sad, or I'll be enlightened. But there's this view, there's this cause. Meditation is the cause of something that I want to have happen. Of course, for anyone raising children, you know the failure of the linear model of causation. Why won't the baby go to sleep? How does a child learn to read? Why can't I make my teenager listen to me? How can I make sure my child gets into the right college? And on, you begin to realize it's not a simple linear path from cause to effect. In organizational terms, we create projects and plans and goals, but they're always subject to disruptions and unanticipated consequences. And we begin to discover the complexity of cause and effect when we're trying to achieve or attain a certain goal. We've seen this in public policy, and we've seen it in world predicaments like climate change and the pandemic and poverty and racial injustice. Our Western linear equation is that A causes B. B is caused by A. No A results in no B. This is our conventional misunderstanding, and it comes from our sense of cause as a power relation. A has some power to cause B. So there's a long tradition, actually, of views of cause and effect, long philosophical arguments and long even religious arguments. Going back even before the Buddha's time in the Vedic tradition, the belief was that the effect pre-exists in the cause. So the effect represents the potency that's inherent in the cause and unfolds from it sequentially, as they described it, as curds from milk or as rain from clouds. As such, effects and transformations represent new guises from the old. So everything's created from the power of the old. So change is seen as that which obscures the real and deludes the mind. So that's in the Vedic tradition. But there were alternative views, and they also had a lot of popularity. So one alternative view to this is the materialist deterministic view, which is also the view of conventional science. Events are explained in terms of the inherent properties of matter. The reality they presented, instead of appearing chaotic and random, adhered to a strict determinism, which Joanna Macy calls the remorseless juggernaut of material inevitability. So the way things are caused is by the coming together of these material causes. An alternative to that at the time was accidentalism, which is the soul and the world arise without a cause. We have some of this in contemporary thinking, in this notion that everything is relative and everybody's opinion is as good as anybody else's. So there were these fourfold views that can sort of be summarized as things. Effects are self-caused, they're externally or other-caused, or both or neither. So here's an example. We can see these beliefs in causality in our own experience. For example, our child is struggling in school. How we understand this struggle will typically fall into one of these four camps. For example, first, he's not making enough of an effort. Second, the school assigns too much homework. The third view, he and the teacher do not get along. The fourth view, it's just a random issue without a cause. So, parents, none of these is the cause, and we create suffering when we don't realize that. So there's a way to view this predicament, child struggling in school, from the perspective of a chemist. So some hormonal imbalance in the brain chemistry is to blame, and so that necessarily suggests, right, a chemical solution. So we'll give the child some Ritalin or something to help them focus. You could look at it from this point of view of a psychologist and say, well, he has unresolved psychological issues, and so he really needs therapy, and talk therapy is going to be helpful, or CBT or some other form of therapy, because this is a psychological issue. You could view it as an educational issue, like this child is not being challenged enough and is bored, or some pedagogical reason. The lesson plans are not structured in a way that meets his learning style needs. You can look at it in a sociological way. He hangs out with a bad group of kids and they don't value getting good grades or succeeding in school, and so therefore, on and it goes, right? We can get ourselves into a real tangle trying to figure out what's happening in this situation that's causing it. But when we do this, we create suffering when we don't realize the complexity and the dependent origination of causes. So in this way, instead of just looking at the situation openly, we're deprived of creative processes for discovery and for creating the causes and conditions for successful learning. So typically in situations like this, even the person involved, even the student involved, doesn't really understand what's causing the struggle. Buddha's teaching was a complete departure from all of these causal models. His teaching, the term for which is patichcha samuppadaya, is the teaching of dependent co-arising. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of Joanna Macy's writing about this, because it's so very, very important. It's so central to the Buddha's teaching. Buddhist thought, she says, offers a uniquely relevant perspective. Its vision of interdependence, presenting reality as a dynamic interaction of mutually conditioning events, posits no prime cause or unconditioned absolute to which occurrences can be traced in a linear fashion. So we can't work our way back to the first cause, right? This causal vision, known as patichcha samuppadaya, or dependent co-arising, underlies the Buddhist perception of the human predicament and of the liberation that is possible. It constitutes the intellectual content of the Buddha's enlightenment, that part of his transforming intuitive realization that can be expressed in conceptual terms. It represents that character of reality, that truth about the universe to which Gautama awoke. The Buddha would say many times in his teachings, whoever sees patichcha samuppadaya sees the Dhamma. Whoever sees the Dhamma sees patichcha samuppadaya. It was absolutely central. So in this view, reality appears as a dynamically interdependent process. All factors, mental and physical, subsist in a web of mutual causal interaction, with no element or essence held to be immutable or autonomous. Understanding this is important because it is held our suffering is caused by the interplay of these factors, and particularly by the delusion, craving, and aversion that arise from our misapprehension of them. So, Macy continues. The reifications we construct, the thingness of things, falsify experience, imprison us in egos of our own making, doom our lives to endless rounds of acquisition and anxiety. Being so caused, our suffering is not endemic, it is not inevitable. It can cease, the causal play reversed. Our hope hinges on no external agency, someone else to save us, but derives rather from the causal order itself, where self and act, project and perception are mutually determining. Hence, liberation entails a vision of the dependently co-arisen nature of all phenomena. This vision, which amounts to a reorganization of personality, is made possible by the cleansing of perception through meditation and moral conduct. So, the Buddha's teaching of causality presents a radical contrast with the other views that were debated in his time in India. It departed from previous causal notions as much as the general systems view of causality does from traditional Western thought. So The Buddha cut through the debates about causation by focusing not on power, but on process. In Patichcha Samuppada, he presented causality not as a function of power inherent in an agent, but as a function of relationship, of the interaction of multiple factors, where cause and effect cannot be categorically isolated or traced unidirectionally. No effect arises without cause, yet no effect is predetermined, for its causes are multiple and mutually affecting. Hence, there can be novelty as well as order. Thus, Buddhist teachings presented a middle way between the positions of determinism and indeterminacy that had polarized the discussion of causality. So Macy says the centrality of this vision of causality to Buddhist thought and practice is not always obvious, because Patichcha Samuppada is not presented as a view that can be taught and learned in the conventional sense. Integral to the concept of dependent co-arising is the belief that the preconceptions and predispositions of the mind itself shapes the reality it sees. This runs counter to the commonsensical notion of a world out there, distinct from and independent of the perceiving self. A genuine understanding of mutual causality involves a transcendence of the conventional dichotomies between self and world, a transformation of the way experience is processed, which amounts to an overhauling of one's most ingrained assumptions. Patichcha Samuppada is not a theory to which one assents, so much as a truth one is invited to experience, an insight one is encouraged to win by virtue of disciplined introspection and radical attentiveness to the arising and passing away of mental and physical phenomena. The character of the reality, which can break through once false constructs, dichotomies, and attachments are dissolved, has been variously termed nirvana, emptiness, Dharma dhatu, Buddha nature. It gives rise to bliss and compassion, for revealing the illusory nature of ego, it brings release from ego's strategies, cravings, and fears. Patichcha Samuppada is considered the basis for right view in the Eightfold Path of the Four Noble Truths. So it's the very first phase of the Eightfold Path, understanding this dependent co-arising. In contemporary science, complexity theory and chaos theory are making similar discoveries. Their goals and aims are not quite the same, as Joanna Macy points out, but their understanding of this quality of dependent origination is parallel. So what's the problem for us? The lure is that the linear model dies hard. It has simplicity, it has utility, and we're filled with apparent examples of this caused this. This caused the breakup of my marriage, this caused, and we keep mapping it onto reality, and we keep failing to account for reality just as it actually is. So I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail in our present predicament, which conveys a sense of urgency as well as individual and social trauma. So there's a lot of suffering tied up in that. And that is our present predicament of this pandemic. So what causes a pandemic? Well, we might say the coronavirus. But the coronavirus is not new. It's not even an entity that's living or not living. It occupies a unique space in our public imagination. They're in the visual images and representations that have been created of it. So our sense that, this virus is causing this pandemic. But that's not strictly true. The virus has been around a long time. So we have to also deal with contagion then. It's not just the existence of a virus, but the contagion. So this virus has a certain adaptation, which is that it can be transmitted by people who are asymptomatic for a long time. So that has enabled it to be very successful in evolutionary terms. But contagion itself is dependent not only on the adaptation of the virus, but on our individual behaviors, on our social mobility, the fact that we move around and connect with each other, international travel, our beliefs. So we have certain beliefs about ourselves in this situation, pandemic situation, and some of those beliefs are bound up in a notion of rights, my responsibilities to others, my vulnerability or invulnerability, so all kinds of beliefs about myself create factors, causal factors in this pandemic, my experience of it, my beliefs about others, social norms, tribal connections, their judgments, transmission, their responsibilities, and care for others. They're all part of what's bound up in this notion of contagion. We have beliefs about governments, about oppression, about power, about leadership, about abandonment, about trust, about resources. We have beliefs about media. These are all causal factors that are contributing to what we call pandemic. We have beliefs about media. Are they truthful? Are they accurate? Are they biased? Which ones are reliable? Which ones can't be trusted? We have beliefs about science, about its validity and credibility and infallibility. And there are differences in those beliefs. And that has spawned, a whole set of constructs and languages: vaccines, immunity, blood, lungs, systemic failures, virus, DNA, disease, contagion, public health, statistics. All these terms from science become part of the public imagination. We have beliefs about history, about past pandemics, about social movements, about protests. So this leads us to, thinking about, well, how do we get a grip then? How do we get a grip on this pandemic? We necessarily begin to go into our linear causal mode where we want to explain, predict, and control. So we want to explain what it is, how it functions, what causes it, and the more explanations we have, the more mysterious this phenomenon is. No explanation serves to make either the pandemic or the virus that contributes to it comprehensible. And so we struggle. And we struggle in particular because we need to explain in order to predict. And we want to predict where and for whom and when this impact is going to be felt. All of our predictions have been utter failures. We're stymied and horrified by these failures. And that means we've failed to control, right? Our measures for control have been complete failures. Even with the greatest minds, the largest supercomputers, the most sophisticated scientific infrastructures and technologies, working nonstop on this predicament. So our control is our attempt to prevent the spread, which we encourage people to wear masks and to engage in social distancing and hand washing. This is our attempt to control by prevention, our attempt to control by preventing sickness and death. And a vaccine is our idea about how we can prevent. We also try to control by treating. We treat the symptoms, we treat populations, we test, and so forth. And we try to control social consequences. So such things as job loss, businesses lost, relationships changing, shift to everything happening online, educating children, entertainment, sports, media, cultural activities like museums and art galleries, concerts, social events like weddings and funerals and birthdays, unrest and protest, all these social consequences. We have not brought this pandemic under control. Knowledge is not control. Prediction is not control. Explanation is not control. And it's beginning to dawn on us that we are not in control of even the most basic pieces of this larger picture. Wearing a mask, maintaining social distance, washing our hands, we can't even control to that extent. So, and this is only one of the predicaments we're in the middle of right now. Only one. So, why was the old man turned into a fox? I was thinking about this, and I was thinking when we engage in our reflections about cause and effect and our discussions about cause and effect, there's not really a problem with practitioner error. And that's what's clear from the koan. The student asks a question. The student honestly is confused. The error is in the teacher. So when you're teaching, so we know this because it says a student asked. When you're teaching, there's a great danger that you're going to lead students astray. And recently I've been talking about this concept of anukampa, of care. And the Buddha is saying that he has done what a teacher should do out of anukampa, out of care for the student. Do not lead students astray. So it's about care for the student. It's care for the Dharma. So in teaching roles, we have a greater responsibility than just for our own personal, well-being or imagination. So the clue is in this response of Baizhang. Do not be deluded by cause and effect. Do not be deluded by cause and effect. Don't imagine or posit a linear causal model onto reality. Don't make that mistake. So this is central in our teaching. Everything depends on it. Everything depends on understanding this, that effects can create causes, that causes can exist with no effects. Like all of these permutations of cause and effect are understandable only if you understand these things as mutually emerging and arising together. So I want to leave some time for breakout rooms, and the way I'd like to structure this is like we did last time, with 5 minutes for each person. And what I'd like you to do is, so you can be mindful about this, describe one situation, any kind of situation you found yourself in the last 48 hours and its causes, and see how many causes you can identify. So each person will speak for 5 minutes and the others simply listen. In the discussion following that, each person taking 5 minutes, let your partners help you discover any other causes they might notice in your situation. So for the people that you're listening to, what you want to be thinking about is, what other causes can I imagine contributing to this situation or helping to create it? Does that make sense? People are kind of nodding. So you're going to be in groups of, let's see, we have 30 people, so let's have 10 breakout rooms of 3. And we'll have, I think, probably, I would say 25 minutes. 25 minutes. That will give us a little time to come back together. So, yeah, so Anne will set us up, unmuting us and letting us come together. Thank you for having your video cameras on, by the way. It's so lovely to see your faces.
We're starting Recovery Dharma. We've read a couple memoirs in the past, and this is like the, not manual, but the main book for a movement that's called Recovery Dharma. It just split off from, I think it was maybe Dharma Punks.
Oh, uh-huh.
But it's a pretty new organization in the scheme of things. So this will be interesting to see what they've set up as their manual.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
These are some of the things that I think our Western practice of Zen makes a contribution to the Zen tradition in ways like this. Um, this isn't really, this isn't even addressed in the traditional Zen training and teachings. So it's wonderful that I think that the Dharma in the West is invigorating Zen and making this kind of contribution. Women in Zen is another one. Just not a concept in the traditional teachings. So wonderful. It so enriches and expands the tradition. So, how did it go?
It went great, but Anne was in the middle of a sentence that was right at the end that was really critical and that blew all our excuses out of the water. All our causes. Would you talk about it, Anne? What Mr. Shakespeare said?
I can't remember the quote or the play, but the fault, my dear somebody, is not
Lies not in our stars.
but within ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Hamlet. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. Anything else? Any discoveries or things you want to share from your group?
Well, I'll share that I discovered that there were two ways to look at the causes. It could be from your own thought about what the causes were and your own approach, or, or any of the ones you attributed to the other person in that scenario could be possible as well. So you don't
Good.
really know.
Yeah. This is becoming a perspectival, right? It's
Yeah.
like from another perspective, it looks like this. Sometimes we think it's really obvious what the cause of something is. And then someone else says something and we're, you know, turned around completely.
Something I've thought about in terms of causes are we label it a cause, but that cause could have happened with a different result.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that kind of, so is it really a cause?
Well, we would say no. We would say everything is a cause. So it's like we say, you know, the answer to every why question is because of everything else. Everything else in the universe is holding this in place.
So you put a glass too close to the edge of a table and then it's knocked off. So what was the cause? Because another time you could have put it too close and it wouldn't be knocked off.
That's right. That's right. So simple causation doesn't really work. We like it because it simplifies things, right?
Well, it works in a laboratory.
No, it doesn't even work in a laboratory. Every single experiment says all other things being equal. That is, there's always some interference in the data.
Yeah, like we say in a vacuum.
Right. Yeah, in a vacuum. But they don't even know that because they can't really run the experiment in a vacuum, for example. So, or they run it and it, you know, they have to account for other variables. So yeah, the phenomena that could conceivably be adequately explained by a linear causal analysis are so trivial as to be uninteresting to us because we're mostly interested in human problems, right?
Yeah.
How do they get caused? How do we prevent them? How do we treat them? How do we control them? So we're enamored of linear causation to the extent that even in Buddhist teachings, it got woven back into the teachings later. The original teachings don't have any shred of it. And if you want to read the very best book on this topic, it's Mutual Causality in Buddhism and General Systems Theory. This is Joanna Macy's book. It's not lightweight reading. I mean, you heard some of it today, but you just have to slow down And when you slow down, it's so profound. It's kind of shocking. So,
So
marvel.
I don't expect an answer to this, but I have never experienced more of a cause and effect relationship of being turned into a fox for giving the wrong answer. And not only turned into a fox, but for 500 lifetimes. So that's a pretty big effect.
It's not,
Superficially.
it's not simply for giving a wrong answer. It's for giving a wrong answer to a student.
Well, there goes that's your relationship
That's right.
part
That's
of
right.
it.
That's right. You have a certain responsibility, and that responsibility is what got challenged there. Joel.
And it seemed to verify the answer, though.
Right. Joel.
That's where I'm stuck.
Seems to verify the answer.
Peg, I wanted to say, so at the end of the story, a student comes up having asked the teacher a question, and did I hear it right that the student gives Baizhang a slap, and
Yeah.
Baizhang laughs?
But the student doesn't ask the question. Baizhang does. So,
So how's it go?
Okay, yeah. So then the students. Well, this is Wang Bo, another very, very famous Zen ancestor. One wrong reply, and this old man was condemned to be a fox for 500 rebirths. If his reply had been correct, then what? And then Baizhang says, "Come here, and I'll tell you." It's always a kind of a provocation where it's your Zen teacher, right? Come here, and I'll tell you. So,
But then, and what
In the
happens next?
tradition-
Who hits who?
Wang Bo hits his teacher, slaps his teacher in the
Yeah.
face. So you have to understand there's a very long tradition of if you don't know the answer, I'll give you 30 blows. So whereupon the teacher either does or symbolically does give the student 30 blows for not being able to come forth. Or Nanchuan's, if you say the word or I'll cut the cat. The monks stand there like tongue-tied. So it's always about how you come forth, and he preempts the teacher and does what the teacher would have done to him. And that's how the teacher knows they have one mind. So,
Oh.
yeah.
That
So,
makes sense to me.
what?
I don't understand. So Baizhang didn't become a fox for 500 years.
No, he didn't give any wrong answers.
Okay. But the man who slapped him became the fox?
No, neither one of them became a fox. That what they engaged in was the play of equals.
Okay. Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does now, but
Yeah.
I don't understand.
It's how Baizhang knew that Wang Bo was as awake as he was.
So which of them turned the other into the fox?
That was before that encounter. So that was
Okay.
at the beginning with the old man, just an old man who's nameless, who approaches Baizhang, and he's been listening to Dharma talks long enough to know that Baizhang has some insight. He's hoping to get out of this continual rebirth as a fox, like waking up yet again another birth as a fox. So, and a fox is in Chinese traditional lore is a shapeshifter. So he assumed the shape of an old man and sat in the back of the assembly until he could determine that Baizhang might be able to save him. Yeah. So it's a great koan to turn around in your experience this week and think about what's really causing this. What's really causing this? So, and that goes for anything, whether it's a mood, this unhappiness, or this anger, or for a glitch in a relationship, this misunderstanding, this problem we're having. Almost anything. You can just start looking and seeing how diverse the actual causes are. And if you take a piece of paper and start listing them, among other things, a cause for you having a conversation with someone is that they eat food. Because they eat food, they live, So because they had breakfast, that's one of the causes of you being able to have a conversation, because they have a larynx. The larynx shifted in evolution so that we could have speech, and so it's just like you start listing the causes. Go right ahead. You'll never come to the end of it. But it's fun because it does break you out of this idea of this causes this, right? Or even these two things have caused this.
It reminds me of that David Bohm, the observer affects the observed. And so it was kind of incredulous to them that just watching the phenomenon, like you said, I think Kim was saying in the beginning, there's not a vacuum where we can do these studies.
Right.
Even the slightest, like just watching it changes it. And
Everything's always dependent on the observer and the tools, whatever tools we're using for perception and measurement and analysis, and the conceptual tools we're using that give us concepts like temperature, right? Degrees centigrade, or those are all constructs. We agreed together that there were such things and that we would use them.
Well, you think about this practice about kind of exploring the underlying causes or potential causes, that in itself can affect the future conditions,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's the premise of practice. And furthermore, your practice is not just a cause of some future effect. Those future effects are the cause of your behavior now. So that's the thing that's really hard for people to get, that causality is not linear. It doesn't just go in one direction. You're being affected by the outcomes. And Dogen talks about that in self-fulfilling samadhi, because the Buddhas and ancestors, because your own enlightenment at whatever point that happens helps you now in your practice. So Buddhism blows the doors off all linear notions of causes. And yet we continue to exist, in a world that insists on linear causality, and we ourselves depend on it all the time because it's what we were taught. It's how our perception is shaped. It's how our assumptions were created.
Would it be similar to the idea that our death, our individual death, is part of our consciousness? And so we can't, that's part of our experience of life, our imagined death or the inevitability of our death.
Everything is a product of our consciousness.
So it's as real as anything happening now.
Our consciousness is putting together what's essentially sets of vibrations and creating meaning structures out of them. And that we are evolved to do in evolutionary terms. To scan the horizon with our sense organs, which receive certain limited bandwidth of vibration. And this is the visual spectrum, and this is the audio spectrum that we can pick up. It's very limited.
But the horizon is the past, present, and future. Everything we can imagine or remember or...
That's a construct. Past, present, and future are a construct. They themselves are things that need to be explained, right?
Or defined, yeah.
Right, yeah. So this is very destabilizing for the egoic mind. I will tell you, it gives you a very deep sense of groundlessness, but it's also quite freeing. And you realize, I'm the Buddha of this present moment. There is no other Buddha of the present moment than this Buddha, the Buddha I inhabit, the Buddha that I am, the Buddha I keep expressing in the world. And it doesn't actually exist. So it's what Musang calls this provisional floating center, that we're always manifesting, it's always unfolding, and that means there's infinite potential because we can always come forth in some entirely new way. So we tend to be very credible for our own conditioning. So our own conditioning shapes what we perceive and experience because we believe it. Not because that's what experience is. So, I know that's a lot. Yeah. Olivia, are you wanting to say something? And you're muted? There you go.
No, I was just, it's a beautiful image, thought, gorgeous. I really want to take that in and work with it.
Good. Yeah. I'm happy if it just throws you for a loop now, as you think about it. Because it certainly did for me when I encountered these teachings. Um, it just knocked the props out of everything. And that was actually turned out to be a good thing because my view was too small and it was too limited. So let this open your mind and expand your sense of potential and possibility infinitely.
I was curious what Marie wanted to say since she didn't get to speak.
Oh, that's fine. It was a bizarre experience talking about cause and effect. It was quite an example of it, really. I go into a room, I'll get zoomed in a bit later, and there's two people already talking. I say hello. I believe they've heard me.
Oh,
and then
no.
they carry on talking with each other.
Ignoring you.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, oh well, I'll just sit and listen and take it in, but it got more kind of curiouser and curiouser, and I was thinking, and then I'm thinking, oh, maybe all kinds of things go through your mind from a reaction to something, and it's interesting
Yes.
to watch what happens in that situation. And I left feeling a bit sad because I was I noticed I started to feel a bit sad, thinking, oh well, these probably know each other really well and I'm new, and maybe they just want to have this, and the whole time they didn't see me, they couldn't see me or hear me.
You didn't know that your video wasn't on.
No, it was on and the microphone was on, but for some reason, because I was zoomed in later, they couldn't see me, and there was I could see all three of us on the screen like you would normally, so it looked like a normal session.
Oh no!
But they both couldn't see me.
Joel and Nelda are on phones. So with phones, you have to sweep to see the whole.
Now that
everything.
explains a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The cause of that was that they were on their phones.
Oh, I see. I have not done this on. I haven't done this on phone. Oh no.
Although on my phone I can see up to 4 people on the screen, so that's why I didn't understand why we didn't see Maria, because.
Yeah, it was a very bizarre experience. But when I came in at the point where I said hello, and Joel said, I'll just start from the beginning again. So that was my cue to think he'd seen me.
Oh no.
It must have just been something he was saying. And so it was all, so cause and effect was all over the place.
Oh, that's such a funny feeling to not be seen when you think you're right there.
Yeah.
It's very strange. Yeah, it was like redoing a scene from years, early years.
Yeah, but that little bit of
When you were,
that little bit of
and it seemed like we were deliberately excluding you, which that's terrible.
Yeah. So that leads that sense of sadness, right?
Yeah, I just gradually began to feel more sad and couldn't understand.
Yeah.
So it just seemed that, what I thought was happening wasn't what was happening. There was something else causing what I was seeing.
Oh no.
You know what I mean? It was all over. Oh, dear me. So it was a real exercise in cause and effect.
So strange. Oh man.
Maria, we hear you and see you now. We
hear you and see you.
hear you.
I feel joyful again now. Thank you.
And most of all, it's all about illusion, because that we are all here together is an illusion.
Right.
Right. But it's a good one.
Glad to hear from you.
So let's do service. We're running really late, and it's probably because the talk was long. But let's do service, and then we can finish.